Welcome to Naperville Notables. I'm Liz Spencer. This is an occasional series by Naperville Community Television where we go out and meet people in the community who are making a difference. Today we're talking with Peggy Frank. Peggy, thanks for joining me. It's always nice to see you.
Well, thank you so much, Liz. It's my pleasure to be with you today.
Now, it's been 33 years.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's both hard to imagine and I'm sure it went by like a blink.
True.
When you first came, and we have wonderful pictures of you as a young curator and executive here. So tell me, but when you first came, what was your thoughts? Was it your plan to stay?
Very honestly, I had anticipated this being another step in my career path. Mm-hmm. It was not uncommon and still remains not uncommon in the museum industry, as in many careers, that there's stepping stones along the way. So I had anticipated coming here to Naperville for a 3 to 5 year time period, which seemed to be the right length of time in that next phase.
And you arrived, what, 1979?
I did, in the fall of '79.
Describe a little bit what Naperville settlement looked like then.
Well, it was a very different picture than what people know of today, that's for sure. It was more open. The trees were significantly smaller, and in fact, many of the trees just didn't exist. The landscaping has a big impact both today and previously. We had at least 3 of our structures that were all boarded up, just waiting for restoration. Fences were very rare. In fact, I don't think we had a single fence. Well, maybe, no, I was going to say maybe we had the picket fence around the Murray house, but we didn't have any other fence on the grounds. We didn't have amenities, like benches, drinking fountains. The roads were just little gravel pathways. It was a very wide open area. In fact, to such a degree, many people driving by just thought it was another housing development.
Wow. So when you were looking at that in 1979 and that, did you have a vision? Did you think about it, what it could be today?
Well, very honestly, the Naperville Heritage Society had an idea of a master plan concept, which was shared with me during my preliminary interviewing process. So I knew that there was a concept to develop the complex into an entire village environment.
Was this the Jane Sint plan?
You could call it the Jane Sint plan, yes, with a few little modifications. Mm-hmm. There had been, in some versions, a little village green, which, excuse me, as I learned more about Naperville's history, I realized it didn't exist in this community. So I knew that there were aspirations for further development, and of course seeing some of the houses boarded up awaiting restoration was another key indicator that there was more yet to come.
Right, that they wanted to bring you more buildings.
Correct.
Correct. So when did it dawn on you, for lack of a better word, that as you were moving through the years and moving Naper settlement forward, that I have something here? This was, there had to have been, I think there had to be a moment, or,
It was definitely after that 5-year mark. Remember I said my original internal plan was 3 to 5 years. Mm-hmm. Well, at 3 years I knew there was still more to do. At 5 years, I was very, very clear in my mind that the opportunities remained limitless. What I had found here in this community was a town where the residents, the citizens themselves, were responsive to learning more about their history, embracing it, and developing, a better understanding of it. City Council was a fabulous partner, and the Heritage Society was unrelenting in their steadfast vision of mission fulfillment. I personally had always felt a need to do something new every period in my life. So it was between that 5th and 6th year when I decided there was a lot more opportunity here in town that I decided it was time to stop renting and invest myself, and I bought my own condominium. And to me, that was a key factor that I was going to stay put.
You bought property.
Correct.
Correct. And so with that opportunity, that you saw, did you see yourself as the leader of those opportunities?
That's a great question. When I was first making the decision to come, I was very wary, not sure if I had enough experience and resources in order to lead the organization in the professional manner in which it ascribed. Yet, my mentors back out east were really supportive. And at that point, we didn't, of course, have computers and cell phones, but we could still pick up the phone and talk to colleagues across the country. And with that kind of support, I realized that I probably had enough of a network to continue to provide that leadership and guidance for the organization. So again, at that 5-year mark, I realized that I thought I was doing okay. We were advancing. I was continually being cognizant of professional standards and where we wanted to expand. It was definitely a stepped, phased process. We could not do everything all at one time. But I felt that I was being challenged, yes, but I also felt that I was growing with the challenges. And as long as I could continue with that professional growth and development, it was enough to keep me engaged, and in turn, I felt I had something to contribute to the organization.
Okay, and I think we are sitting here in Brushstrokes, which is a wonderful, wonderful. It's like a little museum down here.
Very true.
And I don't think necessarily all of Naperville realizes this gem down here, and it's part of the Preemption House, which we all drive by, which we all take for granted, assuming this was the original one. I can't tell you how many times I hear, I'm like, no, it's really close.
Yes.
But no, it wasn't really here. But this was the first big fundraising endeavor on your watch.
Yes.
And a building from the ground up. This wasn't something that came in to be boarded up to be restored.
Right.
No, you were going to build.
That is correct.
And so you start building. Everybody makes that decision. You don't make that in a vacuum. And economy strikes. It's 1990s, early 90s, and that must have been just tough. That your heart must have almost stopped on that. I'm kind of feeling from myself to you.
Yes.
That when you make these decisions as leaders, and then you wonder, what have I done? What was your thoughts when you were looking here? You've got the basement dug out. You've got all these thoughts and hopes and dreams, and you just can't keep the funds coming in.
Well, there's no question it was indeed a challenge. It was a much more elongated campaign and process than we had ever anticipated. But we were determined to at least get the hole filled in and the building, in essence, under roof. We had already invested in bringing in the massive HVAC equipment, and it had to be protected. What made it also very challenging is once we did have the frame of the structure in place, which very honestly, Liz, happened pretty quickly after the hole was dug, people didn't see much activity. So it was very, very hard. Probably the biggest challenge was to communicate effectively to the outward community that things were still going on inside the building. Now, granted, there were some definite lulls of significant lengths of time, but we had to come up with every creative mechanism we could to show people the need was still there, and we needed their support, and that we could make it happen. So we did do a lot of different educational and marketing outreaches, from putting up an old-fashioned door on the front with like the thermometer for the campaigns, and probably one of the more unique approaches was recruiting Gail Niemeyer and her real estate savvy. And she knew, as well as we all did, that so many realtors in this town entice their customers to come live in Naperville due to so many of its fine qualities, including Naper Settlement. So one of our fun times was when we had so many realtors who invested in the campaign, and they each got to put their real estate sign up on this corner. So it made people really stop and glance, but it helped talk about the message and why this building in particular, as the gateway to the entire museum, elevating our entire standards of operation, was essential to continue moving forward.
Was this building the kind of the starting point for some really large improvements? Was this the doorway?
I felt very strongly that we had to have the preemption house in place before we could consider applying for accreditation with the American Alliance of Museums, because the preemption house was going to allow us to expand in our interpretation and exhibitry, like you mentioned in this wonderful brushstrokes exhibit. It was going to provide a workshop that would allow us to expand and improve our storage facilities for the care of the collections. And we could also provide much more efficient office space, which very honestly, all the staff were squirreled away in whatever nook and cranny throughout the grounds we could find.
Yeah, and I think they're still pretty spread out. I mean, you never know where somebody's office is. Everybody assumes the office is in here, and next thing you know, you're at the Paw post office meeting with somebody. Speaking of accreditation, you felt this was necessary for accreditation. If we fast forward to now, you built a beautiful facility over by Public Works, and that was a necessary thing for your most recent accreditation.
That's very true. Accreditation only lasts a certain length of time. And although we received our very first accreditation in 2002.
On the first try.
On our first try.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. And you're absolutely right. A vast number of museums get tabled in their first try, needing to improve certain areas. But you also get a site visit report. And in that report, it identifies, usually reinforcing in our case, what we already knew we had in our work plan, areas they expect to see improved or accomplished before your next reaccreditation. So our reaccreditation started in 2010 and culminated in 2012, a 2-year process. And one of the elements that was identified was improving the collections care. Now, we weren't alone in that. Nationwide, there was a Heritage Index study, and it said the most appalling and greatest need in history museums across the nation was the care of these treasures and material culture that we all have a public trust to care for. So yes, our window of opportunity, piggybacking with the Public Works facility, and again, our great partnership with the City of Naperville, helped us realize one of those major goals.
Right. Well, I think it goes to your leadership too, Peggy.
Thank you.
I really, because you did. You knew you had to get it.
Yes, we did.
And that facility allowed you to have the space and the size. It wouldn't have been very difficult if they weren't building that building.
Well, very honestly, the education of City Council and the other governing boards for the importance of the care of the collection started many, many years ago. It was in front of City Council for well over a decade. It was not a surprise. Everybody knew that this was a priority. And we did a great deal of research and looking to a number of alternatives, from rented quality space to building on the site of our own museum campus. And very honestly, when the new Public Works building came on the radar, I saw it as a window of opportunity that we did not know was going to pop up.
Right.
But it was too good not to take advantage of it.
And you were ready.
We were ready because we had been working on it. And then when we showed our governing agencies the economics of building onto that building versus any of the other alternatives, there were at least a dozen alternatives we had studied. There was no question that they realized this was the way to go.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Turning a little bit to, you had mentioned mentors that you had out east that encouraged you and said we're only a phone call away. And you and I have talked about mentors before. I mean, I think most people think of mentors when you're in high school or college, and I think it's a personal philosophy of my own that I think we should have mentors throughout our lives.
I totally agree with you, Liz.
But you had two big mentors that that you have mentioned to me before. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about why John Stevens and Les Schrader. And we're sitting in Les's home, really. It's his paintings up here. It's his workshop. Why are those two men? Why do they stick out for you?
Well, both John and Les were very different types of mentors,
yes, very.
And they were two of many. I will say that over the years, there's been different people at different times. John was my first introduction to the Naperville Heritage Society.
He came and interviewed with you.
Yes, I met him in Washington, D.C. for my very first face-to-face interview. So he and I shared a very special bond. But over the years, I would say of everyone, he was that special confidant, that person I could brainstorm with and share my innermost thoughts, either challenges or successes, or even just to sit down and say, I'm not quite sure which way to go with this challenge I have in front of me right now. John and I probably had a stronger similarity in style in the workplace than I've shared with many other mentors. So we were able to understand each other extremely well that way. Plus, we just were good friends, and we shared each other's lives, and I think that's part of what evolves with a very long-term relationship. Les, on the other hand, was a very different type of a mentor. He truly introduced me to Naperville's history. He was, many ways a town character who prided himself on his own self-named historian role. Excuse me. And during our time together, when I was here and he was still alive, literally a day did not go by that he wasn't here, either in my office or I was over in his garage or his home. And it was a very different type of support. It was a support of knowledge, it was a support of connections, and it was an opening of doors, which also is something of great value with any mentor relationship. But another person who comes to my mind is when I think about my first arrival here and walking into the meeting house, which was then the sole office here at Naper Settlement, and being introduced to Peg Yonker. Peg Yonker was such a dynamo. I mean, on a volunteer basis, giving more than 40 hours a week nonstop, her energy and her commitment proved to be a guiding star for me. And that her leadership as president of the board at that time, partnered with Jack Powell as vice president, you couldn't have had two stronger mentors leading the organization, at the time that I first arrived.
Well, she is definitely a dynamo. We have some great pictures of Peg in the different buildings and that. And I would have to say, I think that you've done a great job being mentors to other young leaders.
Thank you. Well, I believe strongly on that, both professionally and in my case on a personal level too. But I really feel that you need people to talk with, and you need to feel that you have a secure and comfortable ear. I also feel that as a woman in the workplace, I think it's great to have the balance from both genders. And in recent years, I've also been very fortunate to have some female mentors that have really been instrumental in helping me even think through things on a more personal level. And there are those commonalities that we share. But I agree with your comment. Mentoring doesn't end at any point in your life.
No, and I think you can find it. I mean, definitely. I mean, when I first arrived in Naperville and we started doing documentaries here, you were definitely a mentor for us. You were such a big support of lending, not only your team to us, but your reputation. You took a risk with us, and it meant a lot, and it still means a lot.
Well, it wasn't a very hard risk. You all
I don't know about that, but I think it was a nice thing for you to do, and you didn't have to do that, and so.
Yeah. Well, I am always very willing, and it continues today, to support new creativity, new ideas, especially when we can see how it benefits the community at large. When there are people willing to give of themselves for the greater good, to me that's very satisfying.
Well, and I think when I think of greater good, I think your partnership with the city to help move different things forward comes to mind, that you're able to always seem to convince them they need to invest. And I think of Joe Naper's homestead comes to mind, of wow, what a find. Good timing of the group, the family that owned that property.
Oh yes.
And I think of the many experiences that I've been able to share, and my team has been able to share here at Naper Settlement, that had to be one of the best.
I'm glad to hear it. It was fun, wasn't it?
It was hugely fun. Where else do you get to do a true archaeology dig? I mean,
yes.
the team you hired, I mean, they were the real deal. I mean, they didn't
were.
quite come in like Indiana Jones. So that was, I think they could have pulled it off, but it was the real deal. And tell me how you made the decision. Why did it go that far?
Well, very honestly, it was a blending of a number of different issues that came at one point. The Schifflers, who had owned the property, we had always had a relationship with them, and for many years had said, whenever you're in a position where you're ready to consider selling the property, please talk to us first. We really wanted to look at this parcel of land and see if there was something we could gain from it other than just more private homes. And very honestly, a lot of the public discussion began because then City Manager Peter Burchard had been led to believe that kitty corner from this parcel was Joseph Naper's home. Well, there's a lot of misconception about where Joseph Naper actually lived.
Right.
And he also had a very large family, so there were Napers living in a lot of property. But it led us to doing more documentary research through our curator of research, Brian Ogg's work, where we were able to definitively show, at least through the written record, that the parcel of land that became the archaeological dig site was indeed the piece of property that Joseph Naper referred to as his own homestead at the time of writing his will. Once we were able to do that, of course, timing came into play with the town's 175th anniversary, and always looking to see what can we do to commemorate milestones in this town, which loves to recognize its history.
They
love a good party, they
yeah.
love a good celebration, but it also is a personal, collective community way. Whereas on your family level, you remember certain milestones, whether they're graduations or marriages or births. In a town, you use different milestones.
Right.
And the 175th was one of those. But we had wanted to do something different and not the 150th sesquicentennial, because 175 is not quite the same. So we at the Heritage Society said, well, wouldn't this be the most beautiful gift to the community, is to recognize the site where the town first began, where our founding father literally put down stake to call this home. But then we start to think about what makes it real. How do you really understand history? Yes, and it is the material culture, the things, the stuff that we all surround ourselves with in our own homes or our places of work even. So once the city agreed to acquire the property from the Schiffler family, part of that agreement was that we, the Heritage Society, had put forth the concept of let's do an archaeological dig, a real full-scale dig, to understand what can the ground itself still tell us of our founding family. City was intrigued, and they thought it would be great. And from our perspective, we felt, again, indicative of this town, it was important to work with a professional firm that would deal with volunteers and welcome them into the midst. Although I personally have a great love of archaeology and at one time considered that as a profession, and we have other staff members who were intrigued with that, none of us had the professional skill and knowledge. So it was imperative that we provided that outside professional guidance. So after an RFP process, we were fortunate enough to secure the services of SCI, and we couldn't have done better. They definitely bought into the concept of working with the community, and as you well know through the great documentary NCTV 17 did of the process, we had youngsters from 9 years of age up to 90-year-old citizens digging in and helping us, clean the dirt and find the stories that were to be told. And stories we found, to not only find the foundations of the original log cabin that Joseph Naper built, but the trading post, the very first business established in this town, that we never anticipated, but my, how exciting it was.
It was exciting, and you're right about it's the stuff. We all like to relate on the stuff level.
Yes.
And we just have like a minute or so left, but where do you see museums going? This is a big question to ask in the last, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. as we look ahead, and we're so technology, and we've got to make those history connections. Where are museums going? Where's Napier Settlement headed?
Well, I think because of technology, museums become an even more important catalyst for the community in the future. They are safe places, they are trusted places, and they are respected places. And that's across the nation, but in particular, I believe that's true here in Naperville. And as such, I think they can be the center of community discourse and conversation, gathering spots where people can feel a connection and feel a root, especially in a historical environment, and a place and a sense of calling home. When we become much more driven by technology, which in some ways is isolating and yet connecting, but it's not that personal one-on-one connection. I think museums create that sense of camaraderie and of belonging, and Napier Settlement can continue to be a leader in encouraging people to see their town center. And I feel culturally we have the ability to connect all aspects of this town, from the far south to the north to the west to the center and the core, because it's the commonality of what we all share, and that's our heritage and the roots of how this all came to be where we are today.
Well, I think one of your secrets too for getting people engaged is the many activities. That it's not a stale walk around, look at a display. It's hi, go, try your hand here.
Correct.
Do something.
Well, that interactivity definitely networks into the technology concepts, where you get to be involved and engaged yourself. But here at Napier Settlement, it's on a more personal level. Plus, you can also share it. If you come out to some of the concerts or the reenactments or the special programs, you get to share it with other people. And I think that is a missing link in the technology, that museums add a warmth and a welcome that I think is here to stay.
That's awesome. Peggy, thanks for taking time. Congratulations on 33 years. Thank you for what you've done. Thank you for being a great friend to NCTV and to me. It's a pleasure, and I know that we're going to just keep connected for the rest of the time. So thank you.
You're very, very welcome, and thank you for all of your good wishes and having me here today, Liz.
That's it for Naperville Notables. I'm Liz Spencer. Thanks for watching.